more to respond innovatively to the question of sustainability and inclusion. We must lead when it comes to sustainability. Precisely, the current fashion cycle is not in our favor. The raw materials for garments are sourced from Africa and then manufactured into final products in the northern hemispheres. The final product, when it is discarded, is sent back to Africa as goodwill, and due to the quality of the garments made from fast fashion, the clothing is returned to Africa as waste. It employs many women and youth. And we can and must promote gender empowerment and youth empowerment in African fashion and ensure that everyone working in this sector earns a decent living and works under acceptable conditions. Perhaps the most important thing of all is that we work together, that we find and support collaborative opportunities that ensure that we can realize the potential of African fashion. I believe this week will do exactly this. I thank you for your time and wish you a fantastic, transformative Rwandan Fashion Week.
Round of applause for the remarks that really set space for the conversation that we will be having here today. How do we refocus? How do we add innovation when it comes to the fashion sector? And as I had said earlier, I want all of us to engage. We'll be having a panel discussion here, but we want also everyone in the audience to be part of the discussions. That's why before I call the panelists to the stage, I want to ask you guys a question. What comes to mind when you hear fashion? Anyone, just scream it out. What comes to mind when you hear fashion? Elegance. We have elegance. What comes to mind when you hear fashion? Okay. We will not start the panel until I hear the audience, yeah? So let's do it one more time. What comes to mind when you hear the word fashion? Sorry? Did I hear useless? Okay, we have creativity, we have elegance. What more? Courage, identity, business, fabrics. Perfect, perfect, perfect. All these are important. And just looking at the statistics, from gender equality to youth empowerment, job creation, to even climate action, innovation to education, the $2.4 trillion US fashion industry is still seen by many as a form of entertainment. But it has the capacity to transform the lives of millions of people, particularly women and youth, as it was mentioned by Motsepe in the video remarks. So ladies and gentlemen, when I introduce the panelists for this session, as they walk one by one to the stage, I want all of you to give them a warm welcome. I'll start with Caroline Rush, CBE, the British Fashion Council. We also have Kenya Linton George, owner of Kenya Linton Designs Limited, and also representing the Designers Guild in Jamaica. We also have Tamara Tinjin, CEO, Roundtable, Fashion Roundtable UK, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly. We have Wumi Akinsola, founder of Fast Tracker Nigeria. Last but not least, we have Teta Isibo, founder of Inzuki Designs Rwanda. To set pace for this conversation, I'd like to start with Caroline. Taking action for environmental sustainability, prosperity of business, as well as looking at just sustainable fashion, what does that mean? Is that a luxury, or is that something that we should have already started on?
So at the British Fashion Council, we've been working with sustainable experts and sustainable designers since 2006. And we took the decision in 2011 that that was too niche, is that the fashion industry wasn't ready to just focus on sustainable design. There was a whole process that the industry had to take in terms of transforming itself for positive change. And in 2020, we launched our Institute of Positive Fashion as a way really to think about how we can help set gold standard for the industry and sort of the North Star for designer businesses really as they start to develop and grow or transition their business. So where it used to feel like a luxury is that we're getting to the point because of climate change that it's an essential part of business strategy moving forward. Only in September last year is that we set out a vision of what a sustainable fashion ecosystem would look like in the UK and what a 10-year industrial change programme could look like that brought together industry, government, academia, much broader stakeholders like the waste management infrastructure within the UK, logistics, suppliers, etc. And now we're focused on how we move towards that vision, how we put it into action. And I have to say is that we've had great response from the industry in the UK and internationally because it's research-based, is that it will deliver an industry for the future. It meets the challenges of climate change that we all want to make sure we play our part in doing. And it's an opportunity for social justice, as Precious set out there in the opening remarks, is that it's not just about change in terms of climate change, it's about making sure that everybody within the industry has an opportunity to have a fair opportunity to grow their businesses for the future.
Growing the business for the future. Kenya, I'll just throw the same to you when you're looking at the sector in Jamaica. You are an active player. How is the transition currently like in the country?
For the Caribbean in general, there's not much transitioning because we are practicing slow fashion. We are a more sustainable industry in terms of our general practices in the different facets that you look at in terms of sustainability. Our designers daily grapple with the challenge of whether they should outsource their manufacturing to larger countries who can manage or try to manufacture locally, which is a part of sustainability, manufacturing locally for a circular fashion business. And for us in the region, we are mainly looking to our policymakers for some of the policies that really set us back. So you see where we are very involved in the raw material production, but in terms of the value added, we don't benefit. And for us, we want to understand more about the trade policies, the different chains of productions that we are restricted from. We just want to be able to understand more of that and play a more critical role in terms of manufacturing for a larger scale and just benefiting more from the value-added part of the business.
We'll definitely come back to, because we do have the raw materials when you're looking at different African markets as well as the Caribbean, as you have just said. We'll come back to the importance of adding value, and we'll also take a look at the different policies that need to be put in place to even grow the industry further. Tamara, to just come to you, to set pace, still on the same question, what does a transition look like when you hear circular economy, when you hear the sustainability, when it comes to fashion, what comes to mind?
So I run a think tank that looks at the fashion industry and policy, and we're based in the UK, and there is a lot of conversation happening, which is exciting. Moving towards the just transition, meaning that we would be moving away from business practices which are very exploitative, not only of people, and looking at social justice, but also looking at the environment and our finite resources. And as you said, and as the film highlighted, we are overusing and overproducing at an exponential rate. It's not sustainable. And so to readdress that, we have to. It's almost like reinventing the wheel, because fashion has become this runaway train where the drops into shops, certainly in the UK and in many countries in the global north, are so fast that the consumer is buying too much, and the waste is ending up proving we're overproducing, and then we're more wasteful than ever. So this whole system really needs a readdress, and to get there, it's almost like you have to go back to basics, and you have to really, really understand what a new vision would look like, because if you just try to change parts of this, I don't think it's enough. It actually needs a real sea change. And what's exciting is that when you look at the EU with their EU textile strategy, the UK as well, these countries and also in America, they are looking at how they can take responsibility for the levels of waste. That does need infrastructure funding to support extended producer responsibility, or EPR as it's called. Equally, I think that there's a lot of areas around social justice which are coming up more and more, meaning workers' rights, because it is often women and young children who are at the end of the supply chain for many of the fast fashion and other fashion companies. And sometimes the global north has exported the problem. And all that does is lead to growing exploitation. So nobody within those supply chains is making a fair living wage. So the just transition would support people towards those opportunities, so that everybody across the value chain has meaningful work and is valued. And what my ambition would be was that the end product is something that is valued by the consumer rather than something that's worn once and then thrown away, because that obviously isn't sustainable.
Yeah, Tamara, you've said we're becoming more wasteful, we're seeing more waste coming as years go, and earlier on, just looking at the statistics, by 2030, we're expecting the fashion and textile industry to grow by 60%. Tamara, I'll just throw this back to you. You've brought up the whole idea of waste. To what extent is this a challenge?
I think the waste industry is going to be the biggest part of the fashion industry in the next 10 years. I think end of life is going to be where businesses are going to have to invest. Governments need to invest to support, because I've spoken to a massive UK-based waste firm, and they cannot meet demand as it is, and they're really looking for infrastructure support and to employ more workers. They said to me, the quote was, Tamara, we've got refugees and we've got people from prisons working, and we can't meet the demand currently. So if brands are going to have EPR, then they really need to grow, and they need to grow quickly. So it's a massive challenge, but I think it's exciting, because I think that it will start the conversation on responsibility and what happens to a piece. And I would imagine fast fashion brands in particular, where the volumes are much higher, to suddenly have to be responsible for what you've been churning out, I think adds a whole other layer to the conversation, which I think is going to be very interesting for policy.
For policy, okay. Omni, to bring into the conversation, Nigeria is one of the biggest economies here on the continent. The fashion industry is making lots of profits. So when you're looking at the growth trajectory within the Nigerian, the fashion industry in Nigeria, is it sustainable? Or how would you gauge the fashion sector in Nigeria?
I think I'll talk about Africa as a whole first, and then I'll sort of key in on Nigeria. I mean, the African fashion industry has the least amount of global footprint with regards to the international fashion scene. The global fashion industry is worth, well, like you said previously, about $3 trillion, but African fashion brands contributes less than 1% to that figure. And there's a massive disparity there because of the sheer size of the continent, its population size, and the fact that the African fashion industry actually hires the second highest number of people on the continent, only after agriculture. So we have the output, we have the capacity, but it doesn't necessarily translate to economic growth and economic prosperity. And keying into Nigeria, the brands there are thriving in the sense of the country, but there's so much more potential that we could be harnessing, but we're not able to harness that potential because there are severe issues across every single aspect of the value chain, and it is dire information to share, but there are solutions, and I think that we're here to discuss the solutions, and those solutions range from, well, for one, reducing the amount of second-hand stock that's sent to Nigeria. I think that, for one, is something that could to African countries in general, that's something that could massively improve our economic state and output. And then you have other parts of the value chain, such as the trade aspect of the value chain, where investment and reforms could be implemented so that those processes are a little bit easier. You have the infrastructural parts of the value chain, where electricity and several other aspects that make manufacturing and sourcing a lot harder. But I believe that there are people in this room who are responsible for a range of those aspects of the value chain. But that being said, considering all of these issues, fashion and apparel is still the #1 driver in terms of retail in Nigeria, and especially in e-commerce. So that shows that the potential is ridiculous, because with all of these issues, there's still so much growth, and there's still so much potential, and it still drives retail in the country. So I really do think that we should be figuring out ways to eliminate those barriers.
Definitely, we'll be coming into that, looking at how to really unlock the potential of the sector when it comes to especially the developing countries. You also touched on second-hand clothes. I think I'll bring in Kine later on to also gauge on to what extent that may be a challenge in Jamaica later on. But for now, Teta, how is the industry in Rwanda? How are we seeing the transition? Is there a transition even that is happening?
Yes, so I think in terms of what's happening in Rwanda, we have a few things to our advantage. First of all, I think sustainability is rooted in our culture, not just as Rwandans, but as Africans. If you look at the traditional ways of doing things, weaving, looming, embroidery, all that, it's really, what sustainable fashion is today. And that's what we used to do, and that's what we are still doing. And then secondly, we do not have a culture of waste. And that's because we don't have excess. You have to have excess in order to waste. So that works to our advantage as well, seeing how waste is, the biggest thing that we're fighting against here, mass production and all that. And last but not least, we have a very young economy. Our fashion industry is nascent. It's really just starting up. And so I think that that's to our advantage, because it's easy for us to adapt to good practices, to sustainable fashion practices. So because you find a lot of the developed countries get so much pushback from the big corporations because they have the financial muscle and they have the bargaining power to not want to lose their mass production and all that. So for us, it's really been an advantage, because we can still build our policies and we can still build our industries with sustainability in mind.
Yeah, Caroline, to just come back to you, we've had the issue of waste that has been brought up, and we're also looking at the possible way to reimagine fashion, looking at the innovation coming into place. Is circularity the answer? And how best can we go about it?
Well, I think there's a few things that I've learned from listening to the panel, is that, the opportunity for a growing, sort of emerging industry to not follow in the way that some of the established markets have. So the opportunity really to take on board probably, and the knowledge share and learning that I know is sort of key to this conference, to be able to lead with that rather than sort of re-engineer an industry into a circular fashion economy is really exciting. And from our perspective is that, we're grappling with the waste issue, is that we know that we need to reduce the amount of waste that we're sending off our shores. But we need to really embed innovation in that waste management, to think about upskilling, to invest in all of those processes and frameworks, so that the sort of end of, you say first life, but it's second, third life now, because we have a sort of resale and rental is becoming a very big part of the fashion industry. And so the opportunity to really reimagine what that waste could be, and to really think about how, as part of regeneration, we can put in some, mechanical and chemical recycling plants in the UK, so that we're using that waste and it's going back into the system and closing the loop, is a really exciting opportunity. And I guess sort of learning from what Teta was saying is that, you know, the young designers is taking that craft and, you know, really using the creativity to think about sustainability and product. We're seeing with the emerging talent in the UK. And I think that's because it's a mindset. It's, you know, thinking about all of the impact that the industry has had on the planet and wanting to forge a new future for young people that are coming into the industry. And so we're seeing a lot of the young designers sort of acting almost as R&D in this space and taking some of those recycled materials and making them into trainers or products and collections, and the dead stock from some of the large organizations from sort of fabrics that have no longer been needed through manufacturing of old collections and therefore would, you know, normally have gone to landfill, is now going to students or it's going to young designers. And so eliminating the waste through processes like that is something that is already happening. And then, you know, sort of the opportunity to learn from other sectors and think about innovation and bring that in is just the global opportunity that we all have. So we're actually launching our innovation, our international innovation network over the summer as a way to really knowledge share, to think about the innovation that's happening in the UK and share that with international markets, but learning from the innovation that's happening in international markets and bringing that to the UK so that we can all think about best practice and learn from each other and accelerate the way forward rather than thinking this is going to take 20 and 30 years. We should be focusing on what we can do now.
I like the idea of working together rather than it being an individual problem or a one-country problem. Kenya, to just bring you into the conversation earlier on, Wunmi touched on the whole issue of second-hand clothes. We know that here on the continent, it has been putting a lot of pressure, and some, to an extent, we've seen some governments increasing the rates. Also, we're seeing some countries even going to the extent of banning the importation of such. How is it in Jamaica? How has the response been?
I think before I answer the response in Jamaica, I would like to say it's important that we all become responsible for our own waste. It is not enough to simply say you're going to send your discarded clothing to another country and we should figure out how to reuse it, remodel, and rework it into something sustainable. It is not fair.
On that point, whose responsibility when you're looking at it? Is it the private sector players? Is it the government? I mean, how can we forge partnerships to really find the solutions to waste?
It's the policymakers, the brands, and the consumers. It's everyone. We're all part of it because we have the addiction to clothing that creates that demand, that creates the profits for the brands to see that fast fashion is working for them. How can you tell them to stop fast fashion when they're seeing all these profits? How do you tell someone in finance, we need to stop what we're doing, it's not working? As far as they're concerned, it's working. So for us on the bottom end, for lack of a better word, we now have to figure out how to fix the problem of the addiction for clothing. And the corporations and the brands are simply fueling it by marketing more, selling more, putting out more so that there's more demand. The cycle of fashion is just increasing. So in Jamaica, I realized years ago that we do have containers of secondhand clothing coming to our shores. And it's unfortunate. We are responsible for our waste, and now we're also responsible for waste from another country. And it's not packaged as waste, it's packaged as charity. We're sending secondhand clothing for persons in need. I think we need to revisit that. If you're sending secondhand clothing, it needs to be going to a company that has a business model for refashioning secondhand clothing, a business model for reusing, for end-to-end business in terms of secondhand clothing. Otherwise, it ends up in our landfill, and that is not sustainable for us. We just become a dumping ground, and it's not fair.
Yeah, I mean, Tamara, to just bring into the conversation, I saw you were nodding even when we're looking at it as from an addiction perspective. So how best do you think we can really come together and find a solution to this?
Well, I mean, there is a strand of fashion now called fashion psychology, which does look into this, and I think it's a very interesting area because we look we look at the consumer and the reasons why, the triggers, and marketing knows all those triggers. It knows how to make us feel the need to want more. So sometimes the answer's in the question. It's all of the problems are there already, and it's how do we analyze those and be honest about it. It's about being more honest. It's about, I think it's brilliant that this conversation, for instance, has focused so much on waste, because I don't think that would have been the same a couple of years ago. I think it would have been an entirely different conversation. And it's a much more open and transparent conversation about what is happening when the global north is basically using the global south as a waste disposal unit. And what does that feel like? And if we're talking about the Commonwealth, we have to talk about partnerships, and we have to talk about how do we progress this forwards in a really inclusive way that nobody feels affronted or slighted or used, because currently I think it's a user situation, and it needs to shift to something that's more progressive and partnership orientated.
Yeah, and also on the other hand, Tita, to bring into this conversation, how do we build a local industry competitiveness? What gaps are there? What solutions should we be putting in place to equip, upskill our local sectors?
Well, first of all, to add to what we've been talking about in terms of second-hand, Rwanda got a lot of pushback when we talked about banning second-hand clothing, which is supposed to be phased out, really. But the logic behind that is we have to build our own local garment industries. And how are we going to do that when we are competing with $2 clothes, $3 clothes, right? And keep in mind that what we are getting from these developed countries is bottom of the barrel, you know. We do understand that second-hand clothing is considered sustainable fashion because, you know, it's circular fashion. So in developed countries, it's something that's encouraged, you know, buy second-hand clothes. But what we get is, again, bottom of the barrel, and it prevents us from growing our own local industries because we cannot compete with those prices. So obviously right now we are not ready to say no more second-hand clothes because we do not have the capacity to fill that gap. But I think that it's something that we are moving towards. We have the right policies in place. We have the Made in Rwanda policies. We have policymakers that understand that we need to grow the fashion industry and to do it in a sustainable way. So I think that's an important step. Yeah, so now it's really about doing the hard work and, you know, building the industries, and a lot of training has to be done as well, strengthening our TVETs and our cooperatives and all that, the people that actually produce the garments. Yes, but I think it's something that is being strengthened right now. It's something that's being promoted. Made in Rwanda is, you know, it's becoming a lifestyle. It's something that a few years ago nobody wanted to wear Made in Rwanda, but you know, today it's something that everybody is buying into. It's more than just a trend. It's a whole lifestyle. So I think we have the right mindset, and we have the right policies. So really, what we're working on now is actually building and implementing those policies.
Can I just add something?
Yes,
that's okay. So we do some work with the Centre for Sustainable Fashion, which is part of the University of the Arts London, and we've been doing work around degrowth, which is looking at different business models. And I think what's coming up again and again are the economics of the business. So you talk about the trillions of dollars and the 60% growth, and that all sounds very, very exciting. But at the bottom of the pile is unfortunately or tragically an exploitative practice, both of finite resources, but also of people and labor. So if you're looking at different economic business models, such as the well-being economy or the work that Caroline and her team are doing at the British Fashion Council, it's looking at different economic business models. And I think that's where the conversation around green finance, innovation, embedding that with craft, heritage skills, and youth and female empowerment, I think that's where the excitement for me lies. And then it doesn't become about us telling, it becomes an exchange and a complete progressive partnership.
I mean, Caroline, just bring into the conversation, as she has touched on building the businesses, also empowering the young people to also step up and create the solutions for the gaps that we presently have here. Just do talk to us about the role of business in this.
Yeah, I mean, I think is that we're already seeing young people stepping up, is that certainly they're seeing the challenges of the industry, you know, they're challenging the business models, they're challenging the way that we work, and that's really exciting to see. But as an industry as a whole, and as countries and government and infrastructure, we really, you know, to Tamara's point, need to think about how we frame this for them to allow them to be able to exist and develop not only environmentally and socially sustainable businesses, but economically sustainable businesses as well. And that's where we've been really looking at working with economists to layer on sort of this vision of circularity with a new economic model that could deliver and be piloted probably initially at city level, but something that can really tackle what the barriers are to circularity. It's great to talk about it, but what we need to do is put it into practice and to really understand where those intervention points are. And that's where government comes in to work with industry. And what we've not had to do in the past as industry is necessarily collaborate as big businesses and small businesses, because we've been focused on growth and we've been focused on profit. But when we really think about societal change and we think about industry change, for the first time is that businesses are having to come together with industry, with government, with academia, with innovation in a way that we never have had to before, and with other stakeholders to really focus on that societal and industrial change. And that is really exciting, because that is where the future of industry will lie.
Yeah, you were talking about societal and industry change, and earlier on I had asked it, but I'll pose the same question to Wumni. What are the challenges? Because for us to move forward, we really need to look within and address what we are still struggling with. Looking at growing our local manufacturing capacity, where are we looking when you're looking at the African continent? What challenges are there, and how best can we move forward?
So just sort of touching on again with the second-hand clothing very briefly. I mean, I think we've previously discussed this in the meeting room, and it's sort of a catch-22, because, you know, you have pretty much the poorest population in the world in some of the African countries, and unfortunately, no matter how much we want to slice it, that is what they can afford, those second-hand clothes. And I run a platform which tries to promote African-made fashion. So of course, I don't want second-hand clothing, because it's a massive barrier to us actually empowering ourselves and building the infrastructure that will be required to clothe ourselves, talk less of exportation. So I think definitely there needs to be a phase out, like she mentioned, where we're sort of balancing out the need for the immediate need to clothe the general population, but also the sacrifices. I think sacrifice is a very big one. The sacrifices that need to be made by us individuals, by the companies, by government, and also by global fashion companies, where we need to be making sacrifices so that we can actually grow our industries for the long term, as opposed to thinking about what's the best way to solve these problems now, to make more money, to push more products out. Like, no, you know, we can see the state of a lot of the African economies, and a lot of that is pushed mainly because, is caused mainly because we cannot sustain our own lifestyles. We depend so much on importation. And I think that really is probably one of the most important challenges that can be solved. I think they can all be solved, but that's probably the easiest to solve. I think I'll also go a little bit into investments. I think historically, African countries have been known to not be maybe the easiest places to do business. I know the World Bank's ranking has a range of African countries at the bottom, but that's changing. Rwanda, I know, is rising very quickly in those ranks, which is such an amazing thing for the continent. And so the reality of being able to invest with peace of mind is becoming something that we can start to implement. And I think that that's something that investors and policymakers need to pay attention to. And then you have like other parts of the value chain, for instance, manufacturing, which is improving slowly but surely on the continent, but definitely not at the capacity that it has the potential to. And I think with that's probably mainly caused by all the things I've mentioned previously, but also just a lack of strategic thinking with regards to what can we do about these industries and how can we grow them so that it starts to sustain us. Infrastructure is one of them. Electricity is a massive, massive hindrance into, why we can't produce or manufacture here. Access to raw materials, refining these raw materials. So we have a lot of these we have a lot of these products here. We have a lot of the raw materials, but we're not able to refine in order to create the products that we need. And then you have things like logistics, which a couple of companies, to be fair, are trying to solve, but it's just not enough yet. So I think to sort of tie it all up, a couple of the things that we would need are infrastructural sort of policies to encourage people to start to manufacture and make product, as opposed to importing and just selling the fastest and cheapest. We also have, like we've previously mentioned, trying to reduce the level of secondhand clothing coming into the country. And then I think actually another really important part is us Africans firstly embracing Made in Africa a lot more, because you would find that actually the diaspora and other people in other parts of the world tend to appreciate fashion a little bit more. And that's a shame, because I don't even see how the conversation can go further if we don't value what is made here. So I think that's also a very important aspect. But there's so many, but the great thing is that there's solutions to all of these things, and it really, like she said, is a matter of implementation, sacrifice, a lot of sacrifice, just about thinking about the future of our economies.
From what you're saying, Kini, I just want to bring you into this to help us understand how we can strike a balance. Because on one hand, looking at phasing out of second-hand clothes, we'll have to equip and build capacity to be able to satisfy the market demands. But also, on the other hand, we are looking at doing it in a climate-friendly way, because looking at the carbon emissions, they're getting really pretty much out of control. So how do we really strike a balance between unlocking the potential and also going green and being sustainable?
Striking a balance is very difficult depending on the scale. So if we're looking at the current model, which is the global model of having everything manufactured in one country or one territory and shipped all over the world, it doesn't work. I think what we find work in the Caribbean is slow fashion, which is basically manufacturing locally and supplying to smaller markets. So for instance, Jamaica, we used to manufacture for Canada and the United States and the Americas in general. We had 807 factories employing hundreds and thousands of women, and now we practically have none. They've all been shut down since the 80s when everything shifted to China. And we saw during the pandemic where we had to revive some of those factories to make masks to send to America because nothing was coming from China. And it just goes to show that we have to look within our territories and see how we can create a different supply chain that can serve different markets instead of doing the global thing and saying everything has to be manufactured in this country because this large corporation says so. And it's a complete reset, and for that to happen, it will include the policymakers and the large corporations who are sipping wine with the policymakers, and the small companies really don't have a say. And for the change to happen, it probably will include the customers, the consumers. They're the ones who really can make a change, because if the demand is there, the large corporations are going to continue to do what they're doing. And until we shift that demand, which is what we're seeing in Jamaica. For instance, companies like myself, I'm a small business. I could easily have an investor and manufacture in China and ship internationally. And I've decided I want to grow my business locally. I want to employ local people. I want to keep the business local and keep the charm of the craft. I want to keep the soul in the business. When a customer purchases a garment from me, I'm pretty sure, I'm 90% sure it's not going to end up in a landfill. she's going to hand it down to her daughter or a niece or somebody because the garment means something. I think we need to shift from fast fashion to slow fashion and to look more on demand rather than an inventory-driven model. For instance, on my last trip to Thailand, I experienced something that really gave me like a boost. It encouraged me in what I was doing locally. I went to a company that was manufacturing on demand, and anything I wanted from their catalog I could have on that same day, on demand. And I walked into the store, everything was on display, I could feel the fabric. I ordered a beautiful silk dress, I ordered a jacket suit, and they said I will have it within 24 hours. I asked the gentleman, how is this possible? He said, we have a factory with 350 seamstresses waiting for your order. And as soon as you place that order, we split it and they manufacture it and it's ready for you within 24 hours. I had my 2 outfits within 8 hours at my hotel. They came, did a fitting, and I was blown away. Now that is a better model for sustainability because it's demand-driven. They don't have an inventory of 350 dresses waiting for someone to buy. They have 300 seamstresses waiting for you to come and tell them what you want. And they're kept busy all day. That store was busy all day. People came in and ordered what they want and got it within 24 hours. And we need to shift to a demand-driven model rather than an inventory model that ends up in the discount stores, second-hand stores, and then in the landfill because we just can't maintain it.
And everything you're saying, the one thing that now comes to mind is, so how do we change the mind of the consumer? Because at the end of the day, you say there is that addiction. Yeah. Anyone who would like to take that up, who can tell us how do we now change the mind?
Psychology of fashion.
It's the psychology of fashion, and it's. I think what's been really interesting is that I've worked in the fashion industry for most of my life, and I think that the sustainability conversation is becoming so part of the normal mainstream dialectic of the narrative of fashion now in a way that it never has before, because in the UK, obviously, we've just had COP26. We are very, very aware. We have very, very pertinent activists all around the world now who are very, very aware of fashion's complicity in the climate crisis. So I think that the more and more that this becomes part of the influence, the use of the power of influence, then I become hopeful. In the UK, a mainstream TV program did a partnership with eBay, which is a resale platform. That for us was incredible because before they'd worked with a fast fashion company. That fast fashion companies just went into administration. So it's not as a consequence of that, but it just shows that there are opportunities and that the paradigm doesn't always stay the same. I think it's about a paradigm shift. On a personal level, we have to understand why we get triggered about consumption. What are the things that are lacking in our lives that we need to fill with clothes? Because that's kind of a sad state of affairs, but I think it's something that is a global en masse, that FOMO, that fear of missing out. On-demand and slow fashion and regenerative practices, they are all part of a solution. I don't think there's one solution. There are many layers, rental, resale, all of these are part of it. But definitely when you have a system where you choose it and you get it, whether it's as quick as you were able to have in Thailand, or it's a longer process because the manufacturer takes longer with it, but you really wait for it. I think that helps trigger that panic that you have of like, oh my God, I've got to have it. Oh my God, I've got to have it. I won't be happy unless I've got it, because there's something going on there.
Okay, definitely. Yes?
So I think that Nigerian fashion or African fashion is relatively sustainable by nature, in the sense that not many African fashion brands are churning out thousands of units to sit in a warehouse. It usually is on demand to some level or to some degree. However, I think that's why this panel is really important, because of course, there is starting to become a lot more, there's a lot more attention on African fashion, and the demand is rising, and you're finding that brands are having to produce a lot more, and brands are having to manufacture stock down a lot more. And it's really important that we have this conversation so that we are getting ahead of what could possibly happen and what has happened in other parts of the world where the industry grows and the scale starts to increase, and you're having to meet all of these deadlines and meet all of these targets, and you're not necessarily prioritizing sustainability or being ethical anymore. In all these other parts of the world that have sustainability issues, they were all sustainable at some point. They were all made on demand at some point, but that increase in demand sort of shifted, their direction and their thinking away from that, simply because of for lack of a better term, to be honest, I'll just call it greed. And I think that's where, and I keep talking about it, but that's where sacrifice comes in, and literally every single person on the value chain, every single company, every single factory, every single consumer is going to have to be making sacrifices in one way or another, whether it's in the pricing, whether it's in the amount of time it takes to get your product, whether it's in the amount of money you're making as an organization or as a brand. And yeah, I think my key word and my key thing is sacrifice. With regards to manufacturing, with regards to every single thing that you can think of across the value chain.
Also sacrifice, does it also come to play? Because when you hear made in Africa, some of the local designers, one of the things that is mainly common is the affordability bit. So is that also what you're telling the consumers, the sacrifice? The more the demand increases, the more also the prices will be decreasing. How would you gauge that?
I think, to be honest, we also have to be very price sensitive because we are dealing with a population that is not necessarily that economically empowered. And we have to be honest. And in those instances, sacrifices may come in maybe not buying as much, maybe not buying the things that you don't need just because it looks really fancy or just because it looks really nice. But if you wear it once, you're probably never going to wear it again. So I think I would say that it's really about buying what you need, and from the top of the food chain to the bottom of the food chain, you do find that people, especially with the landfill product, or rather with the second-hand products, they come at next to nothing. And like someone previously said, they're sort of marketed and presented as charity. So people just take as much as they can grab, but you don't need to. And if that demand for those second-hand products isn't here, then they're not going to send it here because we don't necessarily find the value in them. We don't necessarily find the value in them anymore. And then with regards to manufacturers, like I previously said, it's just going to have to be a case of sacrificing on the income for a little bit longer, just so that we're sort of able to build the infrastructure, and eventually you will benefit economically. It's just not an immediate thing, and I'm talking about African countries in this context, with regards to our manufacturing, situations.
Caroline, would you like to add something?
I wanted to sort of touch on the consumer behaviour piece, really, because it's a big dialogue, and we try not to talk about it too much because we're not saying it's the consumer's fault, it's that it's definitely something that industry has to tackle. But I think the role of industry is empowering the consumer to make the right choices. And one of the things that happened in the UK is that our Competition and Markets Authority have taken a stance to really stop some of the fast fashion players wrongly labelling product as being sustainable when it's not. And so I think is that having those standards is really important. It's not something that certainly isn't in place in the UK at the moment. And I know there's been a lot of conversation around sustainability in food, and quite often in the fashion industry we look at what food has done in terms of labelling, in terms of transparency in the consumer, and in terms of sort of our doorstep. We have incentives from other countries in the EU where you could essentially have very well financed a sustainable factory without any direct direct outlay from the business. And so making that choice to manufacture locally and to invest in your community and to provide jobs for local people and to think about doing that sustainably is an intervention point for government. And it's something that, of course, is the industry will pay and the rewards will come to society and the local community. But it is progressive governments that really think about supporting through finance the investment in green manufacturing to enable these local economies and communities to grow.
Definitely. I'm going to, okay, yes, Tamra.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because it was a conversation point around Brexit, was the tax incentives that were being offered and the golden visas from other countries within the EU. So Make It British is an organisation, as you would guess, based in Britain, and what you spoke about with PPE was very pertinent, because they saw an 82% increase in people wanting to onshore. So this localism story is a worldwide phenomenon and an opportunity, but how do you build those supports and incentives? In our report, Cleaning Up Fashion, that we published July last year, we are asking for tax incentives to support B Corps, which is a way of managing and navigating those businesses being ethical and sustainable in a more kind of like corporate manner. And actually there's a lady in the audience who's in the second row who raised something that I want to explore more with people when we get to questions. She's very keen to see a Commonwealth-wide trade agreement, because she said that it's very difficult for brands within Africa to find the logistics. The tariffs are harder for them to import and export from different countries. So I can see her in the audience, and it was a really interesting conversation that I had, and something that I think we could all learn from is how can we get rid of these barriers easily to be more progressive and supportive.
Definitely. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll open the floor. We'll get questions from the audience as we also wrap up this panel.
Yeah, before we move from, is it on?
Yes, it is.
Before we move from the question we were grappling with, in terms of how we will handle the issue of waste, we can't really depend on the customer, and we can't, the consumer, and we can't really depend on the large corporations. I think the large corporations are working to get the consumers to do exactly what they're doing. And until we have Fashionholics Anonymous, that's how we will have to deal with it, just like the alcohol and tobacco industries, where it's, the focus is not on the consumer, it's more on creating a profitable avenue for the waste. Until you can see profits in sustainable fashion, I don't think large corporations are going to go towards that direction until they can see how they will make money from waste. We will still be grappling with the question, who is responsible for it?
I'm going to open the floor now. If anyone has questions, just kindly lift up your hand. And someone from the, okay, we have a hand there. Could you kindly stand and let us know who you're directing the question to? And please do keep it short.
Thank you. Chukwuemeka Chikez is my name. Two questions. What does the panel think about collective action within the industry itself? Because the change will come from the actors in the industry also shaping both consumers as well as policymakers. So I wonder whether within the context of the Commonwealth Business Forum, there should be some Commonwealth structure around the ecosystem to do that. Second quick question is really linking with the previous session and the comment about the links between Africa and the Caribbean, particularly around traditions and identity and textiles and fabrics. Wouldn't that be a good basis for us having some real face-to-face interaction around trade exchanges between Africa and the Caribbean, linked to heritage, but also now actually really doing good business?
Any particular person you'd like to answer those two questions?
The panel has been wonderful. I'll be open to anybody to take those questions.
The second one, Caroline, you can take the first one. Okay.
Absolutely. I mean, there are quite a few collective organisations that are tackling the challenges around sustainability. There's the Fashion Pact, which came out of the G7, which is very much focusing on biodiversity and through that clean energy. There's the UNFCCC Fashion Charter, which is businesses from around the world, lots of large organisations coming together to look at some of the challenges that we've been grappling with today. And then at local level, certainly in the UK, is the idea of our Institute of Positive Fashion is this convening power where everybody can come together to knowledge share, to focus on how we drive change forward at pace. From a Commonwealth perspective, I think certainly through the innovation network that we're launching, there's an opportunity to focus that around initially the Commonwealth, to really think about the innovation that's coming through and how we can knowledge share that way. And I know even just focusing around innovation, then the conversation gets much broader. But thinking about how our industry changes and using the framework of innovation is certainly the way I think that we should think about it.
So in terms of trade with Africa and the Caribbean, or I will mainly speak for Jamaica. Right now, for example, the most successful fashion boutique in Jamaica is a boutique that sells authentic African clothing imported from Nigeria and across the continent. And Jamaicans have an affinity for anything African. I see the addiction to African dramas and anything African that touches the shores in Jamaica. I think it's a ripe field for trade, and I think we can explore more in terms of trade with the Caribbean and Africa, because we are connected. We are so connected, and there's so much we don't even understand about the connection and why Jamaicans love everything that comes from Africa, or the Caribbean people in general. But there is room for improved trade, and there definitely is a love for anything African, so we're open to it.
Any more questions? If you have any question, kindly lift up your hand and do indicate who would like to.
I think I'll just add to the previous question. Previous question.
Oh, there's a question.
Okay. Let's hear the question and then you can add on. Yeah.
Good evening. My name is Wairimu Njage from Kenya, and my question is open to anyone on the panel to answer. I really applaud the bold decision that Rwanda made in 2018 to progressively phase out the sale of and importation of second-hand clothes. And I'd be interested to know how the country has retooled itself, particularly the TVETs, to strengthen skills and competencies. And why I'd like to hear from the panels, because I think it's a discussion relevant across different parts of the Commonwealth. Just on a light note, I don't really think the panel is very compliant from a gender point of view. It's usually the other way around. But that's on a light note. Thank you very much.
I think we'd like to appreciate that we actually have an all-female panelists. A round of applause, because usually it's the other way around. I think, Tessa, you can take that question.
Thank you. Yes. So to answer your question,
looking at how Rwanda retooled after the phasing out.
Yes, okay. So yes, we have started the phasing out, and I saw a statistic earlier. I think it was a growth of like 83% over the past few years. So I think it's been interesting, because obviously our fashion industry is still small, but it has really helped it grow, because the taxes on bringing in second-hand clothes really shot up high. So people had to, to improvise, to go to their tailors, to go to the fashion houses, and at the same time we're promoting the Made in Rwanda policy. So I think it's a long-term thing, but we're definitely already seeing a lot of positive changes. And then, yes, we are reinforcing, the government is reinforcing support for TVET schools and really trying to strengthen those. So I think it's a long-term thing. We are definitely going to see the progress in the next few years. But I mean, Rwanda is known for making very courageous, radical decisions, and you know, it takes a while for people to realize that it works. I remember when we banned plastic bags, everyone was like, what do you mean, how is this going to work? But you know, look at us now, we're a success story that other countries are looking to. So yes, I think it will be a number of years before we actually see the positive influence, but so far the local brands are definitely benefiting from that. And again, keep in mind that it's a phasing out process. You know, we did not just wake up one day, or the government did not just wake up one day and say no more second-hand clothes. So yes, the market is growing. The supply chain is also improving. We have NIRDA that works with industrial development. So yeah, I think we're going to see some industries coming up, garment industries coming up in the future. And that's really going to help the supply to meet the demand.
Okay, Umne, would you like to add on something? Also, I remember earlier on you wanted to add on to the question that was asked.
To be honest, I can't remember now what that question was. But if I remember, then I'll talk about it. But I mean, Nigeria, we haven't necessarily put a ban on secondhand clothing. There is a ban on certain types of clothing, but it's not being implemented. However, what I do see the Nigerian government and policymakers starting to shift to a direction of actually trying to empower manufacturing in Nigeria. Some of the ways that they're doing that is obviously through training. However, what I've noticed is that the training is not, as much as a lot of effort is being put into informing these entrepreneurs, I wouldn't say that the training, just speaking to brands, I wouldn't say that the training is specific to their needs. I think that the general talent is there. The capacity is there. You know, people, like I said, you know, fashion hires the second highest number of people in Nigeria and on the continent. So, but there's a lack of like specialized, high-level, standardized education. So today, what we do in my company, we basically push trade of African fashion brands or Nigerian fashion brands to other parts of the world. But what we're finding is that a lot of these global retailers, as much as they love the story and as much as they love the products, are just not able to support as much as they want to because of the lack of standardization of the products. And so my call and my sort of the hill that I'm going to die on is that we don't necessarily need any more of the low-level education or the low-level help. We now need the more specialized education, the high-level education, the standardization. I think standardization is a massive, massive word because we have the creativity, we have the capacity, but we're just not able to necessarily compete yet because we're unable to really meet up to global standard in terms of standardization.
Yeah, it comes back to what Caroline had said earlier on the importance of knowledge sharing so that we can all learn and grow collectively.
There's a lady, sorry, I can see a lady.
We've actually run out of time.
She has a microphone.
She has a microphone? Okay, okay.
Let's go.
It's fine. Keep it short. That is the last question that we'll be taking.
Okay, my name is Bertha from Cameroon. I want to direct my question to Caroline Roche. Yep. It's just about, I want to talk about quality. Did you face, how did you get there? Because when something is good, it is good. When a dress is good, whether it doesn't matter where it's from Africa or from where, it is good, it is good. But we have situations from where I'm coming where the young girls, because they don't have the job, they just do anything. So, and must I buy because it's from Africa, because I want to promote? So I want to know from her, how did you grow? And how can we help these young women to actually move, to come to the state where whatever they do will the quality will be there for us to, I think she has almost said something like standardization, but I had that question. See, how can we assist young women?
Yeah, looking at the quality. Caroline?
Yeah, I mean, it is that we, to a slightly lesser extent in the UK, is really have helped develop the quality over the last, I'd say, probably decade. And it is about thinking about having established businesses that can go in and work with individuals or collectives or small manufacturing units to help them understand the quality that's required. And we've seen it as sort of some of the more established brands in the UK have started working with our local manufacturers, that the quality has significantly increased and is now at a fantastic standard. So I think it is about sort of, you know, back to the knowledge sharing and the opportunity to really bring people into those communities and understand the quality that is expected, I guess, to be able to sell along other international brands, and that standardization piece that you were talking about then.
Yeah, so Caroline, to just bring you into this, the importance of partnership, even between the Commonwealth and member states, how crucial is that? How can we go about that?
Me?
Partnerships.
Okay. How can you? Well, the lady who's in the second row and I had a very interesting conversation, and that was around logistics, and that was around tariffs and barriers. So tariffs and barriers are costs and delays when you get it down to basics, and businesses run on really tight margins. So if you reduce those, and you boost incentives, but I think the onus has to be on incentives on the right kind of business, then you boost opportunities. And you know, we've talked about waste, but what we haven't talked about, which I just realized when we were talking about it, we're talking about end-of-life waste. There's a lot of waste in the supply chain. So lean manufacturing of even some of the fast fashion brands actually irons out a lot of the waste along that supply chain at the beginning in the manufacturing. It's really about transparency. It's really about using innovation and tech to support using those opportunities right at the beginning. There is a factory that we work with a lot where they use a system called Galaxius. They know who made the clothes, how long they took, and they are generally now being paid a lot more than they were. They're on well above the London living wage. And it's ironed out a lot of the waste of at the beginning. So waste all along the value chain is going to be part of the key conversation. In terms of the Commonwealth, I think these partnerships have to understand the barriers and therefore how to remove them, because as this lady said to me, it is cheaper for her to ship to Europe than it is to ship from Rwanda to Nigeria. Now that's clearly a barrier that needs to be ironed out, and by ironing that out you're going to grow those localized opportunities, because what we're hearing in all of these themes are local, slow fashion, more thought-led processes. Tried and tested formulas clearly need to be slightly deconstructed in order to reboot them into new forms, and I would say that those are the opportunities that we've got to look at and be really honest about what works. And what you don't want is that the caution I would have about removing all barriers is who's going to come in are the big players who could then exploit the system. So there has to be provisions made at a policy level around what criteria you have to meet in order to receive those opportunities, because I think otherwise you could see a saturation issue.
Okay, thank you, Teta. To bring you in, this is the last question, I promise, and then we close off this panel discussion. Collective, we are in Rwanda Fashion Week already, and Collective Rwanda has been at the forefront looking at creating a platform to showcase as well as growing the local industry. How has the growth been in the last couple of years?
Yes, so I am the founding member of Collective Rwanda, which is a group of local designers that came together because we realized we had a shared vision for the fashion industry in Rwanda, which is creating a sustainable fashion industry that, you know, that serves locally and globally. And we realized that there's strength in numbers, and if we came together, we could be able to lobby partners and decision makers and policy makers. And we've been able to work with RDB, we've worked with the British Council, we've worked with many different institutions and all that to promote and develop sustainable fashion in Rwanda. Yes, we have our fashion show on Thursday. Please buy your tickets. Shameless plug. Yes, so I think we are a success story. We started out as four designers, and now we have grown to over 10. I think we're 12 or 15 designers, and we're constantly growing. And we really just trying to have a systemic approach to that. You know, how do we grow this fashion industry in a sustainable way? And yeah, it's really been an interesting journey. We've worked with many different institutions, and yeah, I think it's a good success story. And if we can kind of take that and expand it into other Commonwealth countries, how do we meet with the collective, for example, in Jamaica? I know she's part of a collective as well. And again, going back to this strength in numbers, how do we get these different collectives to kind of work together for a more holistic, sustainable fashion industry?
Yeah, Collective Rwanda is definitely a success story. As we wrap up this panel, I'd like each of the panelists to just give us closing remarks. And if you also have a call to action, feel free. I'll start with you, Caroline.
Yes, I think is that just learning from everyone on this panel shows how much we've got to learn from each other. So it is about the opportunity for collaboration, knowledge share, and the call to action would be really for industry to come together, but to work hand in hand with local governments, because it's what is required for a systemic change.
Okay. Up next, do we have Kina?
Thank you for having me, and I just want to say I'm elated at the invitation to trade with Africa, and I just want to add that while studying in the UK, I remember being told several times that Jamaica has the best seamstresses in the world. We're retraining them, and we're preparing for the demand that is coming from Africa. And we want to match the great athletes that we have, because we have the greatest in the world, and we want to once again have the best seamstresses in the world and supply the world. And I think, as you said, knowledge share and just grow together, and just to help create a more sustainable fashion industry is what we're hoping for. And it's going to take everyone. It's going to take the consumers, the policymakers, the brands, for us to get there.
Tamara?
Change is never easy, but it's necessary. We are facing a climate emergency head on. We have to think with a paradigm shift in new progressive ways. Some of the old systems aren't working. They are no longer fit for purpose. I think people in all areas of life are being very honest about that. And collaboration is going to be the key to that.
Wunmi?
I think I love the topic, business of sustainable fashion. I think it's really interesting just listening on this panel that sustainable fashion actually means something different in each of our different geographies. In the UK, you guys obviously have a more advanced fashion industry, and there it's really trying to repair a lot of the damage that is being done, or that has been done. And for us, where we're sort of just developing, it really is about mitigating those sustainability challenges, but also looking at the sustainability of the models. So for me, it's not just about sustainability of the creation, it's also about the sustainability of the creation of the business models, so that we can have more economic prosperity long term, as opposed to immediate gratification. And I just think that that's a really interesting that's something really interesting I've noticed on this panel. So it was great learning from you all, and thank you for the opportunity.
Tessa?
I would say sustainable fashion is not a one-size-fits-all. It's not a one-stop shop. Different countries are at different stages, and it's interesting to see the different things. Some are promoting second-hand clothes, others are saying, let's ban it. So I think it's important to learn lessons from each other. For example, us as a growing economy, we have seen the failures of industrialization, how that has led to mass production, lots of waste and pollution. So how do we, as an economy that's growing, as our buying power increases, as we start our industrialization, how do we make sure that we don't repeat those same mistakes? So I think that I will close by saying we need to intentionally integrate sustainability in our business models while they're still SMEs, while we're still a young economy, so we can just grow with that with that in mind.
Thank you so much, Tete, and thank you so much to all our panelists for this amazing conversation on the business of sustainable fashion, or rather. I would like to thank, I'll start with you. We have Caroline Rush, CBE, the CEO of British Fashion Council. Right next to her, we have Kenya Linton George, owner of Kenya Linton Designs Limited, also representing the Designers Guild in Jamaica. Right next to her, we have Tamara Jinjik, CEO, Fashion Roundtable. Better?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. And then right next to her, we have Wemi Akinsola, founder of Fast Tracker in Nigeria. And lastly, we had Teta Isiwo, founder of Inzuki Designs here in Rwanda. Thank you very much, ladies, for sharing your insights.